Well, I am the moderator, and I'm going to introduce myself. I am Jasmina Theodore Boulanzer, and I'm an economist and a lawyer, and I've spent my entire career in the private sector. So my perspectives are going to be different from most of you who are in NGOs, government, and have a different life and career experience. My slides are up, and which button do I use to change? Down one, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I actually enjoyed putting this together, because thinking about women leadership styles and what I have found works and doesn't work in the private sector, it caused me to think about 32 years of practicing law and to see what makes it tick, what kind of aspects are useful, and it made me pull together a lot of things I've read over the years. And when I started, it was always said a woman needs to work twice as hard for half the pay. Women tend to wait for recognition, men just claim it. Women ask permission, men act and only explain later if it's necessary. And that women are perfectionists. And some of that stuff still rings true. How much has really changed? And in my presentation, I want to briefly talk about what I understand leadership means, what I understand about culture and management style, and to offer some perspectives. There are different theories on leadership, whether it's trait-based, you're kind of born into it, or whether it's strictly from your position, whether it's authoritarian, or whether it's situational. But when you read the literature, it seems that leadership really is a process for social influence, where one person can enlist the aid and support of others to accomplish a common goal. That's sort of at its abstract. I mean, really, no man or woman is a leader until people are willing to follow what they're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of leadership literature. Three basic categories of interest to me are business literature, of which two examples in the US that are very popular are Peter Drucker, the late great management expert, and also the Hershey-Blanchard situational leadership approach, which I'll talk about in a little while. There's also a great deal we can learn about leadership from athletics and team sports, because coaches have to take a disparate group of people and make them work as a unit and give them motivation and the ability to perform. And so successful teams are usually the result of successful leaderships in their coaches. And again, in the sports world, and I know very little about sports, but I know in American football, there's John Wooden, who's very famous. And in rest of the world's version of football, which we call soccer, there's the Dutch coach who invented this concept of total soccer, where any player is always prepared to step in and do what other players, to fill in gaps. They're just kind of no prima donna concept. And then finally, the area of the military gives us a huge amount of literature about the concept of leadership, what works, what gets people to follow. You could say that the first book on leadership was Xenophon's Anabasis, when we talk about the 10,000 Greek mercenaries that went into Anatolia to fight in the Persian Wars. But I think that even though historically the military has been an area for men and training men, the whole point of the leadership concept is you have to keep learning what works in what situation. You can never stop and assume you know it all. And that's why there's more and more things being written, and we're lucky in the internet era that we can access these things so quickly. Because I'm the daughter of a military man, in fact, my father graduated from the military academy in this country when it was still a kingdom, I tend to have a lot of books at home written about military leadership, and one of the ones I really liked a lot was a book by a retired US Air Force general and PhD General Cohen, and he has looked at what characteristics do successful leaders share, whether it's in the business world, in government, and in the military. And by successful leaders, it's not the one who just does well today. It's who is really successful over the long term. And he defines 8 characteristics. The first is maintain absolute integrity. I mean, you can cheat once, but if you're going to cheat a lot, you're going to get caught, you're totally undermined. So shorthand is you have to do what's right, even if nobody's looking. You also have to know your stuff. You have to understand the organization or the institution where you are, figure out what makes it work, and then on an expert level in your field, never stop learning. Something's always happening. Or you might forget something and you should remember it. As has been stated in Slavka's talk, you really have to, as a good leader, state what is it you expect from your team? What goals do you have? What priorities? What standards? You know, Seneca said, no man, you don't know what port you're sailing to, then every wind is a bad one. If you have a goal, and then you state to your team what you expect to be accomplished, that will help accomplish the goal. Do not assume people can read your mind. I know I used to be terrible at that. I just assumed, well, if I know, everybody knows. No, they can't read your mind. You have to state your expectations, and you have to do it a lot, over and over. More of the characteristics you really have to show, if you're a leader, I think, to be successful: uncommon commitment. You may fail, but you can't quit. Just to quote Napoleon, an extraordinary situation will require extraordinary resolution. Expect that the results will be good. I don't care how hard the task. But, going back further in history, Hannibal, when he was confronted with the Alps and trying to fight ancient Rome, he said, we're either going to find a way or we're going to make a way, but you just expect that you can do it. You have to take care of your people. After all, you're not doing things alone. As a leader, by definition, you've got people that you're trying to inspire. And even Xenophon tells us that people will be glad to obey, and in modern parlance, to follow, to work with you, if they actually believe you care about them. That's a very important characteristic. Put duty before self. If you want to create an effective team, you've got to put your life on the line, or you fulfill the things that you have to fulfill so that you can be an inspiration to your people. You can lose, but then you get up again. I found a really interesting quote from Admiral Togo, who was a Japanese admiral in the Russo-Japanese War in the early 20th century, and he was known as the Nelson of the Pacific, and he also wrote his journals in English. But he's captured the Russian admiral Rozhdestvensky after a naval battle, and he just said, gentlemen, defeat is common for a soldier, and there's nothing shameful about trying and failing. What is important is, have we performed our duty? So when you're on a business situation and you've got a job to do, you have to work to the best of your ability. That way your team will work with you. And then get out in front. This was the 8th characteristic. Go where the action is. If you ask your team to do something, they need to respect you, to know that you can be a human being, you understand them, you're willing to, work just as hard. In the area of situational leadership, it takes some of these concepts and characteristics about what are good things for a human to be, and then it says, so how can we be all those good things? Well, what kind of styles of leadership and management can we use? And it depends on the situation. I think we all know the same style doesn't work every day. Although those of you who have children, the same method that you use with child 1 is not going to work with child 2. Or, you need a third method to get husband to do something. But the situational leadership model says that leaders should recognize that they need to use different styles depending on the maturity of the people they're trying to lead, the abilities, the kinds of tasks that are involved. Excuse me a minute. There's a great old movie called 12 O'Clock High, and if you watch it carefully, there are vignettes that show different leadership styles given different situations, and if you like Gregory Peck, it really doesn't matter what he's doing in a movie, but it's a very instructive one to watch sometimes to say what works here, what works there. The more formal version looks like a leadership matrix where essentially we talk about 4 quadrants. There's a leadership style that's sometimes appropriate called directing, which means you go do this. There's a different leadership style for a different situation. You want to coach people and help them. You make the decision, but you help them understand why. There's a quadrant 3 is typically the situation where you make the decision as the leader, but you're supporting your team to come to an understanding through discussion of what you need to do. And then there's my favorite, because if I get too busy, it's delegating. You know, here's the task, you go do it, I trust you to make it happen. That doesn't work for everyone at all times, and so the point of the matrix is you have to keep moving from one box to another, depending on the situation. As I was going through my career, where I spent appreciable time at 4 different private institutions, I realized that each of those institutions fit one of those matrix boxes. I was with an international law firm that was totally aggressive, self-confident, you know, you eat what you kill, work or die. You know, it's an extreme testing environment, and that was, you know, quadrant 4. Responsibilities are delegated. You sink, swim, or leave. Then I went and worked for a large oil company, which was quite different. People were old-fashioned. Of course, this was the 1980s, 1990s. There were very long-term planning horizons in the business, so you needed a lot of discussion about what needed to be done, how to plan for it. There was a level of bureaucracy, and there was a lot of conformity. And I think some of the team discussion was important because it also meant that if something went wrong, you could share the blame. I worked in Russia for a small pharmaceutical company, and that was a very different experience too. It was completely hierarchical, completely leadership was a function of position and position only. So middle management employees were extremely reluctant to make any decisions. They were waiting for total direction, and they were very reluctant to take a risk. And finally, I worked for a high-tech company where lots of electrical engineering teams, prima donnas, they're very, very smart people. They didn't know anything about business, they knew a lot about science. And so the real trick was how to sell your ideas to them, even though you know what the outcome is, but you have to get them to cooperate, or they're just going to go off into their research bin and never reappear.